All right, the challenge is gonna be whether or not I can do this one-handed. So this is my mono black pioneer deck. That is the closest deck I have to what can be considered a standard Magic deck. It has 60 cards, and we use full playsets of some cards. A playset is 4 copies. So I run 4 copies of most of the spells that I want to be casting frequently, meaning that there really isn't a whole lot of variation here, and that's a big part of why this is my first deck that I'm going to show you guys. So, naturally, orange sleeves in a black box. I am nothing if not someone who sticks to a brand. So, getting into it. Oh, geez, this is hard to maneuver with one hand. So, this is a mono black deck, so the mana base for this deck is pretty simple. I use a lot of basic snow swamps. Snow is just a keyword that makes those things a little bit better in niche cases, but more than anything, it's just a flex. So a majority of the deck are 1 mana, like very cheap to cast, aggressive bodies that I'm able to play from the graveyard or in some way buff over time. So there's Knight of Even Legion. I run 4 of these guys. They're one of the more aggressive creatures in the deck in that they get larger the more life that my opponent loses each turn, and I can use their activated ability there. So for 3 mana, I can make them larger and give them Death Touch, which is a very useful combat trick to have posted on the body of a card. People see that, they're intimidated by it, and it makes their decisions a little bit harder. And it makes my decisions a little bit easier because I just attack people. I just go at them with frothing vampires and zombie jackals. Dread Wanderer, I only run 3 copies of, but that was Griffin. Baby. Dread Wanderer, I only run 3 copies of, but I'm probably going to change that here soon. They are also 1 mana to cast, so very easy to get out of my hand. They don't buff themselves over time, but they have a pretty aggressive base stat block for the amount of mana that they cost. A 2/1 is just a pretty good rate. So they enter the battlefield tapped. They're a little slow, but for 3 mana, they're able to return themselves to the battlefield, and that comes useful. Like, that comes in handy later on in games. There's a few times where I haven't had a whole lot to do other than play Dread Wanderers from the graveyard. In a similar fashion, there's Bloodsoaked Champion, also a 1 mana creature, 2/1 on the body, so a pretty good rate there. He can't block, so I can't use him on defense, but that's okay. This is an aggressive deck. My opponent's supposed to be on defense, not me. So this guy, he is a little bit easier to get back from the graveyard than Dread Wanderer by just a small margin. So he's kind of like an all-star in this deck in a similar way to Knight of the Even Legion. Our stinky dogs, I like them, but they're kind of mid. That said, I want more of them. So Bloodsoaked Champion, all you need to do to play them from the graveyard is have 1 more mana than if you had cast them from your hand, and have attacked with a creature. Not hard to do, especially since we're probably going to be attacking with Bloodsoaked Champion. So if someone decides to block a Bloodsoaked Champion coming in, yeah, it's almost guaranteed the guy's going to die. But You can more than likely play them from the graveyard the turn that they die. So they just keep coming back, and it can be a little bit of a slog attrition kind of problem for our opponents dealing with Bloodsoaked Champion. Mukatai Soul Ripper is an interesting card. I'm actually going to put this aside and get back to this in a moment. Because it's a vehicle. So that's an artifact card. It's not a creature whenever we play it, but I'll get back to it, because it can be. It's got those stats for a reason there. But first, we have Scrap Heap Scrounger. Scrap Heap Scrounger looks a little different from the other creatures that I've shown you guys, because it's an artifact creature. So that means that I don't need black mana to cast them. I just need 2 mana of any color. That's what that's asking for. And they only have black in their body text, and all that is another play from the graveyard ability. A lot of these guys do very similar things, and that's good. I like consistency, and when we have like 12 cards in our deck that do nearly the same thing, especially being aggressive bodies, it makes for a pretty straightforward deck that gets one job done almost every time, and that job is killing our opponents. So we have 4 of these guys. I like them a lot, so I got them in foil. They're just really cute. I like my little robots. They're sweet. So that's an artifact creature. This is just an artifact. It is not that 4/3 creature until you crew it. Crewing is neat. All you need to do is have another creature that has a power equal to the number listed under that crew, or next to crew. So this is asking for crew 2. That means we're looking for any creature that has a power of 2 or greater in order to turn this guy from an artifact that can't attack or anything into one that can. So luckily all of our creatures are 2/1s or 3/2s, except for Knight of the Even Legion. And our 2/1s also recur themselves from the graveyard. That's sick, because Mukatai Soul Ripper says that whenever they attack, you may sacrifice another artifact or creature. If you do, you put a +1/+1 counter on Mukatai Soul Ripper, so it gets larger, and it gains menace until the end of the turn. That just means it's a little bit harder to block. But it's hard calling it an exploit, because that's just kind of how the deck is supposed to work. But what I can do with Mukatai Soul Ripper, especially with Bloodsoaked Champion in particular, the all-star boy, is crew Soul Ripper with the Bloodsoaked Champion. He has the power 2 right there, so he can crew. Turn Mukatai Soul Ripper into a creature, and then sacrifice Bloodsoaked Champion to Soul Ripper. That way we can make Soul Ripper bigger and harder to block. Since we attack with Soul Ripper, that activates Bloodsoaked Champion's raid ability. So long as we are attacking with Soul Ripper, we're able to continue to replay Bloodsoaked Champion, crew Soul Ripper, and continue to grow that guy until our opponents hopefully die. I've only got that duo out once before, but honestly I think that's just kind of a luck issue, because I run 4 of these guys and 4 of these guys. I should be seeing that a lot, and it's really fun to get going when it does. Anyway, that's most of the creatures. I still have 2 different creatures that I run 2 copies of. So I run the least number of copies of these cards right here, but this is my top end. These are the creatures that I'm probably going to play later on in the game in order to close a game out. If these guys aren't just overwhelming my opponents with sheer numbers, this is a good way of really cinching it at the end. They're almost the same card even. They're 4 mana. They both have flying. One of these guys I can get out for a little cheaper because it has an alternate casting cost there that isn't hard to, jump the hoop in order to get that off. But Rankle here has haste, so he's able to attack the turn I play him. So Rankle ends up doing a lot more work more often, I think, than Spawn of Mayhem. But Spawn of Mayhem is a threat I'm able to push out earlier that gets a lot of attention, which is good for my other boys. Opponents don't like seeing Spawn of Mayhem hit the battlefield, so they will usually do something about it. And I really can't be bothered if that's how they choose to use their removal. Now we're getting to the non-creature spells in this deck. I only run 3 non-permanent spells, but I run a playset of 2 of them and 2 copies of the other one. So they make a decent chunk of the deck, but it's really just for consistency reasons. So we have Thoughtseize. I run 4 of these guys. This is just hand disruption to kind of ruin my opponent's plans. Also 1 mana, so I'm really not spending a whole lot on anything in this deck aside from the top end creatures, which is pretty ideal. If I'm able to disrupt my opponent's hand and overwhelm them on the battlefield, it can shape up to be a really discombobulating game for some people. So I run 4 of those. I run 2 Grasps of Darkness. This is just removal, as is the next spell I'm going to show you guys, Fatal Push. They do slightly different things, but the end result should be the same. I'm just removing creatures. I'm playing black. Black is really good at killing creatures. So if I clear my opponent's board, that leaves things open for me to attack with. So that's why we run those guys. I run a couple of Liliana, the Last Hope. This is a Planeswalker. It's a little bit of a weird card compared to the other ones I've shown you guys, but we really don't have to worry about this as far as the deck analysis goes. These guys are just here for some niche utility that comes out here and there. So glossing over Liliana, we're now done with all of our non-land cards, and we're into the non-basic lands. There's not a whole lot to say here. I run 4 of Mutavault. Mutavault is a colorless land, so it doesn't tap for black mana, but usually I'm able to get away with this just okay. A lot of our spells just require 1 black mana to cast, and I have some other good stuff in here that keeps me in color. But Mutavault is good because it can turn itself into a creature. If I'm drawing a bunch of land, sometimes I can be stuck with nothing to do. So drawing a Mutavault after a bunch of swamps or something can be like, well, at least I still have a 2/2 creature that I can use. And what do you know, that can sometimes be enough to squeeze out a victory. Hive of the Eye Tyrant is a little bit similar to Mutavault, only it taps for black mana. This is a land, by the way. This is just interesting art for one. So it taps for black mana. It sometimes enters the battlefield tapped if I'm unlucky. And it can also turn itself into a creature like Mutavault, though it costs a lot more mana to do so. I rarely use that ability, but it's good to have just in case. That's why I only run 2 of these guys, because it doesn't come in handy often, but when it does very good. Field of Ruin is kind of a similar thing for that reason. Again, only running 2 of these. It's just some land destruction. Sometimes it's good to disrupt your opponent's lands because their game plan might depend on some lands. There are good utility lands. I mean, if someone destroyed a Mutavault or something of mine with one of these cards, it could leave me with a lot less to do, especially if I was really needing that Mutavault. And that's like a pretty low floor example. There's a lot more you can do with Field of Ruin than just that. Takanuma, Abandoned Mire, is an interesting one. It more often than not, I play the first one of these guys as just a land. It's a legendary land, so I can only have one out at a time. But um, later on in the game, I can sometimes use this channel ability to get some value out. So mill is just I put the top 3 cards of my library into my graveyard, and then I return a creature or planeswalker from my graveyard to my hand. So it fills up my graveyard itself, and then I can choose a card to put back into my hand from among those cards. Or if it's later on in the game and I already have a pretty full graveyard, I just pick the best one from among cards that are already in there. And getting a well-timed Takenuma out has definitely scored me at least one victory in the past. So I'm cool with running 2 of those. Castle Lochthwain is another non-basic land. It just is some card draw. I run 4 of these guys, and that is something I'm probably going to change. They tap for black mana, so they're not that bad. But I just don't think I use them that often. Card draw is good, but 3 mana and tapping this land is asking for a lot. That's 4 mana to draw a card. More often than not, I'm doing other stuff with the mana I have available. And last but not least, the final card I haven't shown you guys is a foil Urborg. This is a land that turns all my other lands into swamps. So if I have this out and a few Mutavault, the Mutavault no longer tap for colorless, they tap for black mana. All that is a little bit of fixing. It's a quality of life improvement for the rest of the deck. That's why I only run 1, and plus I have a blingy foil version to show off with people. So that's my Pioneer deck. A whole lot of consistency, not a whole lot of variation in cards, a pretty simple game plan at its core. I'm just swinging at my opponents and clearing out their board. Yeah, I don't know. Not a whole lot more to say other than that this deck does work. I have gotten 2nd place in citywide tournaments with this thing. So, it's a strong motherfucker, and for its simplicity, I kind of call it like a baseball bat whenever I'm shuffling up against people. No one's ever really upset whenever I take a win with this thing, because I don't know, no one feels like I tricked them or anything like that. It's just it's a blunt object coming at your face.